Hello, and welcome to NARUC International's webinar on the regulator's response to COVID-19. I'm Erin Hamill, Director of International Programs here at NARUC. Before I make introductions, I'd like to cover a few items. First, what is NARUC? We are a nonprofit organization founded in 1889. Our members are the regulatory commissions in all 50 states and territories. We have associate members from over 20 countries. Our member agencies regulate electricity, natural gas, telecommunications, and water utilities. What is NARUC International? We are a grant-funded team dedicated to providing technical assistance to empower the global regulatory community to drive meaningful change in their energy sectors. The United States Agency for International Development, USAID, is a key funder in our programs, and we are delighted to co-host this webinar with them today. We have been implementing peer-to-peer regulatory partnerships and regional regulatory projects for more than 20 years, beginning with our collaborative work with energy regulators in the Europe and Eurasia region, which continues to this day. Currently, we partner with energy regulators in more than 40 countries in Europe and Eurasia, Asia, Latin America, and Africa. We've had great registration for today's webinar, so let's take a minute and see where you all are from. We invite you to fill out this short poll. I'll go ahead and cover a few webinar logistics. This webinar is currently being recorded and will be posted on our webpage. If you have questions, please use the chat box within the GoToWebinar panel to the side of your screen. Please send us your questions at any time during the webinar. Our panelists will be responding to questions during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Before proceeding, I should mention that the opinions expressed herein are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views of the U.S. Agency for International Development or NARUC. We would like to thank the generosity of the American people for supporting this webinar. So it's great to see the strong participation we have from around the world. We thank you for joining us for this webinar. Next, I'm honored to introduce our next guest, Dr. Stephen Burns. He is Chief of Energy and Infrastructure in the Bureau for Europe and Eurasia at the U.S. Agency for International Development. He manages and supports over 150 million programs in technical assistance and projects in 10 countries of the former Soviet Union and Southeast Europe, closely collaborating with counterparts in EU member states, as well as with the U.S. State Department and Department of Energy. He plays a leading role in regional U.S. assistance policy and program development with respect to energy sector reform and anti-corruption, identifying, protecting, and upgrading critical infrastructure, developing alternatives for energy supply diversification, and promoting energy efficiency. We appreciate the support of USAID's Bureau for Europe and Eurasia for supporting this webinar. Steve, please go ahead and share your comments.
Okay, Erin, thank you for that introduction, and I'll be really brief here so we can get to the panelists, which is why everyone signed up today. I just want to thank you all for joining us on this webinar that's going to focus on the energy regulator's role in mitigating the impact of COVID-19. We're obviously in an unprecedented time, and you know, as we all say, we're all on this together. So just a couple notes, right? Since the outbreak of COVID-19, the U.S. government's committed more than $500 million in assistance specifically aimed at fighting the pandemic. This funding will save lives by improving public health education, protecting healthcare facilities, and increasing laboratory disease surveillance and rapid response capacity in more than 100 of the most at-risk countries around the world. But USAID delivers more than just funds. We deliver expert technical assistance, training, capacity building, health system strengthening, and life-saving medications. For decades, the U.S. has been the world's largest provider of bilateral assistance in global health. But the pandemic goes beyond impacts to public health system. It hits everyday life, including financial markets, job security, and personal health and safety, effects that are going to be long-lasting, including in the energy sector. This is where the regulatory agencies play an important role. Right? In the name of public service and consumer welfare, regulatory actions ensure that citizens maintain essential services, gas, heat, water, electricity, and so on. And also that utility company employees have protections while providing these services. As you're all too aware, this places a large responsibility on your agencies. You have to balance the need for immediate protections with keeping momentum towards long-term sector goals, as well as positioning the utility sectors for recovery when the time comes. Recognizing these challenges, USAID is working with the State Department, Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, Department of Defense, and others as part of an all-America response to support health systems, humanitarian assistance, and economic security and stabilization efforts worldwide. In the energy sector, we're collaborating with our counterparts on best practices. Last week, we convened panels of electricity company experts to discuss continuity of operations under emergency scenarios, a topic we've been working on in Europe and Eurasia for many years. So thanks to NARUC for convening a panel of US and European regulatory experts to share their perspectives on the impact of COVID-19 in the energy sector, right? Including mitigation efforts that you all have put in place to prevent disconnections, establish payment relief plans, and conduct your functions remotely, right? Because regulators are often in the center of coordination efforts with various government agencies, aid organizations, and utilities when responding to crises, it's important to have these types of forums to share best practices on a global scale. By sharing these experiences and processes, we're going to continue to help build each other up. As such, we plan to continue these events with our partners, and I ask that all of our attendees reach out to NARUC and provide them with topics of interest that you would like us to see us cover in the future. Now, finally, I'm aware that we have attendees from around the world on today's discussion, right? And I know that other bureaus at USAID are continuing their close work with their counterparts, and NARUC is continuing its work here in North America. But please permit me to speak for a moment about the Europe and Eurasia region where I work. And so for more than 30 years, USAID supported the institutional development of energy regulators in the region, right? Bolstering their autonomy, building their technical capacities, and so on. Through the collaboration with NARUC for the past 20 years, we've seen tremendous growth in these areas. And it's at times like this where the benefits of the labors are worth it. So please accept my compliments, right, for the proactive steps that your agencies have supported. Your work's a credit to our long collaboration. It's a credit to your agencies, to your countries, and yourselves. Now, and I say on a personal level, I look forward to getting out to the region and seeing you all again personally. So with that, I offer my thanks to NARUC. I offer my thanks to the audience and to the panel of speakers that we have today that's taking away some of their very busy time to share their thoughts. Please let me turn it back to Erin.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you again for USAID's support. For this webinar, we're delighted to have a regulatory expert facilitate this important conversation about regulatory responses to COVID-19. Hisham Shoaiki joined NARUC in March 2019 and serves as the Principal Technical Advisor for NARUC International. Prior to joining the NARUC team, Dr. Shoaiki was the Director of the Office of the Federal Energy Advocate and the Director of the Forecasting and Market Monitoring Unit at the Public Utilities Commission of Ohio. Many of you joining this webinar likely know Hisham in person through his work with our international programs and his domestic work as well. Hisham, we're delighted to have you introduce our esteemed panel of speakers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Erin. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, friends and colleagues. Glad to learn that we have a large number of participants from all over the world today, the largest ever for a NARUC webinar. This is a demonstration of the high level of interest in today's topic of discussion. We have 4 distinguished panelists today, 3 regulatory experts from the US, and a regulatory expert from the Republic of North Macedonia to share with us their respective organizations' responses to the COVID-19 pandemic. Our panelists' detailed bios can be found in today's webinar material. Given the limited time we have together today, I will briefly introduce each panelist before they start their remarks. With that, let us dive right in. First, we have our NARUC President, Commissioner Brandon Presley from the state of Mississippi. Commissioner Presley was elected Public Service Commissioner for the Northern District of Mississippi in 2007, re-elected in 2011 and 2015, and most recently in 2019 without opposition. Commissioner Presley, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Hisham, and thank you to all of our guests who have joined us this morning from around the world. We sincerely appreciate, on behalf of NARUC, you taking time to be with us today for what I am sure will be a very good discussion. and presentation. I know that we have a very great panel that I have read and that I know that are going to present this morning. I want to say also a thanks to Steve at USAID for the great relationship that NARUC enjoys with USAID and the work that we do together that is so meaningful for our colleagues around the world and here in the States. And so thank you, Steve, for your work. As I said, we're all proud to pull together this morning to talk about response to a pandemic that 6 months ago, 8 months ago, many of us did not have on our radar, and we're not thinking about in the terms of the impact of the energy sector and really where do we go from here? What lessons do we learn? But at the same time, how do we respond during this time in a way in which protects the public interest and gives consumers confidence and delivers electricity and energy as we continue to combat this together. And so I'm very proud that at NARUC we have began right after the pandemic to put together a site on our website, a link on our website to a state regulatory actions tracker, which actually goes through in each of the 50 states and our territories and gives fellow regulators and those in the general public an idea of exactly what is going on in each area as far as it concerns to disconnections, bill relief, aid to consumers, so that we can all learn from one another. And so I encourage you, if you're interested, to look at the NARUC website, check out the state regulatory actions tracker, which will contain links that will carry you actually to the actual order or press releases from each agency that I think is very good, and it helps disseminate information very, very well. I'm from Mississippi. We are the poorest state in the United States of America, and so impacts to our citizens are felt very tough. And as our unemployment in our state has now risen by 14,000% in the last week, we, along with every state and territory in the United States, have felt the deep impacts of COVID-19 on consumers, on our energy companies, and the public at large. We have been very concerned in our state about disconnections, making sure that in a time of a public health crisis, that people continue to have water and electricity to heat their water, to make sure that proper hand washing and hygiene are able to be carried out. And so on Sunday, March the 14th, the commission met in a special meeting to issue an order prohibiting disconnections for 60 days. And we just revisited that last week and reaffirmed that order, which will prohibit companies and providers from disconnecting service through May the 14th. We did that in a quick action, along with same sort of action has been seen in every state and territory in the United States, to make sure that our consumers were able to carry out and follow the health guidelines as best as possible. And one of the least worries that they would have during this period would be the worry about their utility service to stay healthy and to stay in compliance with health guidelines and to keep their family healthy. Of course, this brings the issue of how once the pandemic has slowed and things return to normal of some sort, how do we deal with bill impacts? And we're working through that right now with some what I think are innovative approaches, looking at customer deposits that are held, how we possibly can apply those that in many cases have been actually forgotten about by the consumer. They put up the deposit and maybe years later that those dollars are held there. Can those be applied in this period to help with that relief? But disconnections have been a very big concern for me and for our commission. Our population is very susceptible by health standards and by the indicators of COVID, and we want to make sure that we keep those services on during this period, and we figure out a way to judiciously work with the industry and providers to work through that as we go forward. Not only have we been dealing with COVID-19 and all of its impacts on both our economy, our providers, and on consumers, but we live in an area of the United States it's kind of termed Tornado Alley. And just last weekend, one Sunday ago, we had 11 people in our state killed during deadly tornadoes. We had one person killed in a tornado on Sunday. And so we're at the peak of our tornado season in the Southeast and in Mississippi and Alabama and Georgia and throughout our region, in which not only are our utilities and our commissions being faced with needing to respond to COVID-19, obviously forefront and very important in our minds, but also with response, recovery, related to tornadoes. And so we had last weekend around 100,000 Mississippians without power, many of whom just got power a few days ago. And so it has taken pretty much a week for those customers to get service back as we continue to respond not only to the virus, but also to natural disasters and emergencies that come up during the period. I am really appreciative, very appreciative to NARUC and NARUC staff, Aaron, Hisham, and others for putting this together today, because as we learn together in a time in which we've never been here before, none of us who are alive have ever been here before in dealing with a global pandemic. We also have to keep our eye on issues such as tornadoes and natural disasters that come up during this period. And how, with all of this on our plate, how do we balance the interests that we're here to protect, the public interest, and make sure that we are operating in a manner that's nimble, that we can continue to adjust as the situation adjusts. You know, in many cases, old rules are still there to follow and are great guideposts. But what we knew 2 weeks ago can only help us going forward. And so we're beginning to really look at how can regulatory agencies, how can the private sector continue to move with a focus on the future, a focus on response, but a focus also on recovery. Where do we go once that we move forward? We've been very fortunate during this period to work with our cohorts, our colleagues at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, where we have addressed such issues as working with the Federal Reserve on the commercial paper industry and trading, to make sure our utilities are able to have liquidity during this period financially. Designation of utility workers as critical employees. We know that as many states have in place now or continue to extend their shelter-in-place orders, we wanted to make sure that our utility employees, both from electricity, water, gas, and telecommunications, were able to do the work that continues to power our economy and keep our people safe, with a focus on reliability and accessibility. And so we're continuing to focus on that. NARUC has been a major help in that, and I'm so very pleased of the work that our staff at NARUC has done to keep our regulators abreast of what's happening around our country, but also to help facilitate these discussions where we not only talk about what we're doing, but also learn from other regions around the world of lessons that we could take back home and apply. So I think it's very, very important that we continue this discussion. And Hisham, thank you for letting me join this morning. I look forward to the rest of the panel.
Our pleasure. Thank you, President Presley. We have right now a polling question that we are going to post. Given what President Presley was talking about, bill relief, has your commission, in collaboration with the utilities, distribution, transmission, retail suppliers subject to your jurisdiction, offered any type of temporary bill relief or discount to certain groups of customers during the difficult and unprecedented time? And while we're doing this, I am going to introduce our next distinguished speaker, Chairman David Danner from the state of Washington. All right, that's what I wanted. I wanted to see that the majority of you have already granted bill relief to the citizens in your country or your state. Governor Jay Inslee appointed Chairman David Danner to the Utilities and Transportation Commission in February of 2013 and reappointed him to a second term in December of 2018. Chairman Danner is also the acting chair of the International Confederation of Energy Regulators, which is known as ICER. Chairman Danner, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Isham, and good morning, everyone. It is 6:21 a.m. on the Pacific coast of North America, so this is a great way to start the day, and I thank you all for being here on this conference this morning. Obviously, these are historic times. We've never seen anything like this before. I come from the state of Washington. Washington was one of the first states to be hit with the COVID-19 virus We had an incident of 9 deaths at a nursing home in Bellevue. That was back in January 31st. And the next slide, please. Since then, we've had a number of incremental steps that I think have been, we've seen some form of these in all of the states in the United States. But on March 2nd, Governor Inslee, or on February 29th, Governor Inslee declared a state of emergency, which is still ongoing. Beginning in March, he closed all the schools in the 3 largest counties in the state, and those 3 counties are about half of the population of our state. On March 11th, he banned groups of larger than 250, and he banned all conferences. On March 13th, he closed all the schools in the rest of the state. 2 days later, he banned all groups that are larger than 50, and he closed the businesses and restaurants that were not deemed essential. On March 19th, he banned groups larger than 10. And then by March 23rd, he issued a stay-home order with exceptions for those working in essential businesses. And he issued a 14-page list of what those businesses included. And as you might expect, that did include workers in energy, in communications, in transportation. He allowed for restaurants to provide takeout service, which has been very important to me personally. Next slide, please. Just to give you an idea of Washington State, we're a state of 7.6 million. We are a very trade-dependent state, so there has been a lot of, our commerce requires a lot of travel, a lot of working with people in other countries. We are obviously the home to Boeing airplanes, and we have a lot of commerce that has been affected by the pandemic. In the last 3 weeks, we have seen 600,000 claims for unemployment. Those are people who have been thrown out of work. There are also, of course, a number of people who are employed in the gig economy who are seeing that their livelihoods are going down. The numbers of folks who are actually directly impacted by the virus, we have had 138,000 people tested. Of those, almost 12,000 tested positive, and as of yesterday, 634 people sadly have died. Next slide, please. So in our world, where we have to ensure that energy services are available and still affordable to people during this difficult time, we took a number of steps at our agency to see what we could do to lessen the impacts on families and businesses during a time of economic uncertainty. So the first thing we did is we didn't issue an order, but we contacted the companies that we regulate to request that they suspend disconnections and that they waive late fees. All of our companies stepped up. All of them agreed to do so, and they did so voluntarily. We did request that Governor Inslee issue an emergency proclamation that would allow us to hold our hearings virtually, remotely, so that we didn't have to open our building. All of our workers are now working at home. I am currently at home, and we have been running all of our hearings and our rate cases and all of our regulatory matters working through WebEx and Skype and other applications. It's interesting to see how my team has stepped up. We have not missed deliverables. Everybody is working from home very responsibly. We're learning a lot about telework in this environment. So we also requested the governor to issue a proclamation that would allow us to change some rules and allow companies to assist low-income consumers, those who are the most vulnerable during this time. We had some money set aside that we had collected for low-income assistance over the years. We had some surpluses that were built up that we needed to distribute very quickly. And rather than work through the usual community action agencies, which can sometimes be slow, require in-person interviews and so forth, we allowed one of our companies to actually set up a portal and deliver that assistance online very quickly. And so far, the numbers have been staggering. On the first day that that portal was available, it had more than 1,000 requests for bill assistance. We've liberalized the eligibility requirements for that, so more people can get the assistance, but they're getting it faster. And we're seeing the same kind of commitment from all of the companies that we regulate. Finally, we are looking at ways to lessen the impact right now. We just recently closed a rate case where we had some deferrals. There was some money that was over collected from utilities, and normally we would distribute that over a 2-year period. We said, no, let's get that money out right now. So we're looking around and seeing what pots of money are available that we can get out to folks right now when they really need it. We've also taken some steps with our smaller companies to delay the filings of annual reports and payments of regulatory fees, because we regulate not just large electric utilities, but we regulate small transportation companies, airport shuttles, limousine services, household good movers. And those are folks who are really hurting in this environment. Next slide, please. So now we have to look forward and see what are we going to do going forward to ensure that we can both minimize the effect on consumers, but ensure that the companies that we regulate are going to continue to be healthy and provide safe and reliable service. What we're seeing is there's no roadmap for this. We're going to have to make this up. And that's why it's going to be very important for regulators to be talking to one another in all of our jurisdictions so that we can learn from each other. What is the impact on electric and natural gas load? Well, so far what we're seeing is at a national level, I think that the number in the United States has been somewhere around 6% decrease in the electric load. In our area, we're seeing it's a little less than that, but we don't know what the long-term or short-term trends are going to be. But this impact on gas load is going to impact the revenues of the companies we regulate. On the consumer side, what is the level of bad debt that we're going to see? Since the companies are not going to disconnect for non-payment, it means that there will be folks who cannot pay, or that the companies are going to be obligated to continue to serve. So we're going to see bad debt. How will that affect the bottom lines of the companies, and how will the companies recover that? How long is this pandemic going to last? We don't know. What are the short-term impacts going to be? Well, we know that consumers are going to be hurting, but if the economy gets running again, we don't know if this is going to be a short-term matter. It could be a long-term matter. Even if the stay-at-home orders are lifted, we don't know what the reticence of consumers and citizens is going to be. Are they going to want to go back to work? Are they going to want to go out to restaurants? So we're going to see businesses that are going to be hurting. Some will fail, and this is going to have an impact on electric loads, and it's going to have an impact on the bottom lines of the utilities. So we need to be thinking about what kinds of regulatory tools we can enlist to ensure that the needs of customers who are hurting in these times are balanced against the needs of the utilities for safe and reliable power. Normally, we have in our state, we do our regulation in a very traditional manner. We look at an historical test year to see what the revenue requirements are historically, and then we do some adjustments looking forward. Is that the best way to do that in this environment when there is such a sea change? Perhaps, perhaps not. We're going to be looking at that. Are there other regulatory tools that we should be looking at? I know that Wall Street has been very favorably disposed towards decoupling or revenue sharing in this time. We're going to be taking a look at what kind of tools are going to be necessary, because we know this is not going to be business as usual. And then finally, looking at my own agency, as I know regulators are, what is the impact on our agency going to be? We're going to be going into a time when there's going to be decreased tax revenue available, There's going to be a lot of other priorities that governments are going to have and where they're going to spend their money. Our agency is funded mostly as a percentage of a regulated company's gross revenues. We know those are going to decrease. If our resources go down, how is that going to affect the work that we do? What is that going to do with the size of the staff we have? How much they can produce? What kinds of work are we going to have to set aside if we can't do it? Those are all questions that we're going to have. Now, I know that you're all on the line here looking for answers. I think at this point, I don't have as many answers as I do questions, but I think the first step is really identifying what the issues are going forward so that we know what it is we need to deal with, and then we'll just develop our plans for dealing with them. So thank you again for being out so early in the morning for me. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you, and I look forward to the conversation. So back to you, Isham.
Thank you, Chairman Danner. This is just a reminder that you folks can ask questions to our experts in the dialogue box. So you can always type it in, and someone from our staff will read it. So now that we've heard about disconnections, we're going to post another probing question. Has your commission, in collaboration with the distribution utilities subject to your jurisdiction, offered any type of disconnection relief to certain groups of customers? And while you guys are putting in your answers, I'm going to start introducing our third speaker, Mr. Asim Haq, Vice President, State Policy and Member Services at PJM. Mr. Haq leads the State Government Policy Division, which is charged with being the primary conduit between PJM and state governments. Prior to joining PJM, Mr. Haq was my boss. He was the chairman and chief executive officer of the Public Utilities Commission of Ohio. He was appointed to the PUCO by Governor John R. Kasich in 2013 and reappointed to a second term in 2016. Mr. Haq, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Hisham. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Well, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It's wonderful to be able to spend some time with you today, albeit in this format. I'm going to spend some time talking about the response from a regional transmission organization to the virus. So I work at PJM. PJM is the regional transmission organization for 13 states and the District of Columbia. Our footprint extends as far west as Illinois and as far east as New Jersey, with a number of states, territories in between. Overall, the footprint consists of about 65 million customers. Now, PJM has three primary business functions that it conducts on a day-to-day basis. They consist of planning the high voltage transmission system, operating that system, and then operating competitive wholesale markets. So three primary functions that PJM executes on a day-to-day basis, all of which support the concept of reliability. However, as our planning started advancing for responding to the virus, there's really one of those areas that to us became the most critical area. And that's really our operators, the folks who are operating the high voltage transmission system, ensuring that a watt gets from point A to point Z in tandem with our transmission owner and generation owner partners across the footprint. So what you see in front of you is a timeline that encompasses our activity from January to April. And what I would note is that as we were developing out this timeline from an executive team level, everything that we did was centered upon the concept of keeping our dispatch operators safe and healthy. If you haven't been to a regional transmission organization, or you haven't seen this with your own utilities, these concepts of control rooms are extremely critical. And so with PJM, what you would see if you haven't had the opportunity to go and visit the PJM control room or an RTO's control room, what you'll see is, if you have seen a movie like Apollo 13, it almost looks like a NASA-esque control room. Now, the folks that are on the floor of those control rooms, our dispatch operators, these are folks that go through a substantial amount of training and certification. So these are folks that you cannot train up quickly. And so all of the employees at PJM became sort of our most prized assets at PJM. And so everything that we've done has been in an effort, of course, to ensure that everybody at the company, and you'll see the lead in January and February, stays healthy, that our membership also stays healthy. So one thing that's unique about the RTO is that voluntary membership-driven organization. There are 1,000+ members at PJM, and many of them show up on the Valley Forge, Pennsylvania campus to participate in membership meetings. Well, if you can imagine, they're flying in or driving in from across the country, and we got ourselves to a point in roughly February heading into March where we said this is probably not safe for them or for us. So those membership meetings have actually been conducted remotely since that time. But again, the lens towards keeping our dispatch operators safe and healthy. Currently, PJM, typically we had 2 primary shifts of dispatch operators. This is something that has to be monitored 24/7. There's no time off for them. And so what we've done now, in an abundance of caution, is we've created what is effectively a small unit of volunteer dispatch operators that are willing to be sequestered as the virus continues. And these folks, they have made the decision themselves to frankly leave behind their personal lives, tremendous personal sacrifice, and actually reside within a 3rd control room that we have built just for them. It actually I don't want to say too much about it, but it was a training center that has been effectively redesigned for just these few dispatch operators who were tested prior to entering that sequestered control center, and they are now completely separate and apart from their other colleagues, their other dispatch colleagues, and are going to be, frankly, making sure that a watt gets from point A to point Z across our footprint for the foreseeable future. We are very hopeful that we can all get back to business as normal, business as usual. I know that I'm sure my commission colleagues across the country, all of us, frankly, are hopeful we can get back to business as usual, but we are going to act with extreme caution in exposing that group of folks, frankly, to anybody until we feel that, and they also are an important part of this decision, that we are in the clear. Last thing I'll say is we are also monitoring the decrease in load as a result of the virus. In fact, if you just were to Google PJM and pandemic coordination, it should pull up a website that has quite a few documents that we've posted associated with this issue. So obviously the country is concerned about this issue. We're concerned about this issue. We've had on Monday, April 6th, our peak was down 14.6%, and energy down 14.2%. So those are large numbers. Those are the largest numbers that we've seen. But undoubtedly on a day-to-day basis, you're seeing a reduction in forecasted load and what's actually being consumed, something that we're monitoring closely. And with that, I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Hisham, I'll turn things back over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Huck. That's interesting. That's probably one of the most challenging things for dispatchers is to have the load shape drastically change from what is defined as normal. Dominic, now we're going to go with the fourth probing question before I introduce the fourth speaker. Have the transmission system operators, system dispatchers in your respective countries or states developed and shared with you the revised emergency procedures for employee safety, grid operations, and communications protocols? And while we're waiting for the results, I'm happy to post the results of the third question, which was about 81% of you have were cooperated with your utilities and discussed disconnection procedures and disconnection relief. And now our fourth speaker. Okay, so about 50% have already established or communicated emergency procedures with your regulators, with your dispatchers. Our last speaker is Ms. Elena Kolevska, head of the Electricity Department and the Energy and Water, and she is at the Energy and Water Service Regulatory Commission in the Republic of North Macedonia. Ms. Kolevska has more than 15 years of experience in the energy sector, including security of supply, energy strategies, investments in grids, electricity markets, licensing, and price regulation. Ms. Kolevska, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon and good morning to everyone. Thank you very much for the introduction and for the invitation to be a part of this panel discussion as well. Currently, I would say that the whole system in the country is adapted and organized in a way to prevent the spreading of the virus and to enable the health system to manage the crisis appropriately. So since March 2020, the government has been taken measures almost every day concerning COVID-19. So schools, universities, kindergartens are closed, and therefore employees with a child below 10 are free from work, and also employees with the chronic diseases are also free from work. All restaurants, cafes, sports
Ms. Kolevska, we can't hear you.
Yes. Is it fine now?
Okay, now, yes, now it's fine. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. So the next slide, please. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. So as we are approaching by the end of April, health authorities expect that the number of the infected citizens should reach the peak. So there is a more restricted curfew for the moment during the working days and also from Saturday to Sundays. Besides the pandemic situation, the president of the country declared the state of emergency on the 18th of March with the duration of the 30 days. So last week, this state of emergency was expanded by additional 30 days. So next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay, thank you. The regulatory authorities, as the other institutions, try to follow the recommendations of the health authorities and organize the work in a manner that measures of the health authorities are implemented. Most of the employees work from home. However, there is a minimum staff in the office with the concrete schedule. All meetings with the third parties are postponed, and the internal meetings are organized with the attendance of the minimum employees. There is no organizations of the meetings like appointments, public discussions, debate, preparatory sessions of the regulatory authority, and public and the interested parties are informed from the website, through the emails, and from the press releases. Organizations of the tele and video conferences for discussions and the decision making are being organized. Next slide, please. Thank you. There are travel restrictions, of course, inside and outside of the countries. However, in this period, we now manage to reply to the consumers and stakeholders' requests according to the time limits set by the laws and regulations, except those requests that require travel on a visit on site, or some meetings that should be between the service providers and the consumers. Next slide, please. In this period, ERC adopted several measures in the form of the recommendations. We recommend to the distribution system operators for electricity and heat not to disconnect consumers due to the unpaid invoices. Also, we recommend electricity and heat suppliers not to ask the distribution system operator to provide the disconnections due to the unpaid invoices. And we issued one warning to the electricity suppliers not to abuse the situation and increase the electricity prices due to the fact that we got information from several sources that sometimes the offers from the suppliers for the electricity was doubled or tripled than the market price. Next slide, please. Besides the ERC, also government took measures connected to the energy issues. So they the government expand the monthly social allowances to which was eligible to the energy vulnerable consumers, also to those who were left without the jobs. And it provides possibilities for the economic operators to apply for the financial funds secured by the government. Currently, regulatory authority and the stakeholders are discussing on some topics like not to calculate interest on the unpaid invoices of the socially vulnerable consumers, and also to allow payment of the unpaid debt in the several installments. Next slide, please. Dominic, if it is possible for the next slide.
I've just changed it. Is it coming
also
through
the distribution system operator and the transmission system operator undertook some measures. For example, distribution system operators' employees are always exposed to the higher number of contacts with their clients and consumers. So they decided to close the reception offices and to encourage consumers or interested parties to use online services, and for the urgent matter to use the contact phones. Users can apply for the electronically for the invoice and can quickly pay the invoice without registering. Next slide, please. Also, in this period, distribution system operator does not provide new connections to the grid, except those that are necessary to be realized, like due to the urgency, some of the criteria is applied, like no physical contact with the clients, then depending on the available material on the stocks, sufficient subcontractor capacity, etc. Also, the measuring devices are not going to be read every month, or except those that can be accessed remotely. So the consumption will be estimated. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay, thank you. The transmission system operator somehow divided its measures into the two topics. One is to secure safe operation of the National Dispatching Center. So they adopted a plan that included 3 different premises in case one is contaminated, and of course one which is outside of the capital of Skopje. So dispatchers also follow a strict plans for shifts, so they can in a way don't mix or don't have contact to each others. So the one that will be contaminated will one group of the dispatchers that can be contaminated does not have any contact with the other that can come on the shift and on board. Next slide, please. Also, they made a reserve list of the employees that previously worked as a dispatchers, and now they're on the different position of the transmission system operator. TSO currently only carried out functions, carried out activities that are scheduled, and they have already started on the field. The number of employees that work from home is increasing, and they are ready from home to respond quickly to the matters. The number of maintenance teams for the transmission line and the substation are also, let's say, based in home, but they are equipped with the necessary equipment, so they can be ready and to intervene in a short time period. Next slide, please. So at the end, I would say that despite this crisis situation, the security of supply in the country is not jeopardized, although we are a small energy market with most of the energy from abroad. So distribution system operator and transmission system operator are ready to quickly respond to the possible outages and damages to the grid, because there is no intervention to the energy market, at least for now. From the several suppliers, we received, let's say, notes that their liquidity could be jeopardized. However, this will be later resolved between the ERC and the stakeholders. We monitor the activities on the stakeholder on time. We are now receiving the data for the 3 first months of the year. So we'll see how everything, also the consumptions of the energy will be in this period. So thank you from me.
Thank you very much, Elena. Now, before we start questions, I want to put a polling question 5. And this has to do with cybersecurity. We have heard that cybersecurity attacks have increased in the US since the beginning of COVID-19. For example, they have appeared as coronavirus-themed phishing emails. Have the utilities in your respective countries or states informed you of any increase in cyber attacks since the beginning of COVID-19? So while we're waiting for answers, I'm going to start now. We have a large set of questions here from the audience. I'm going to start with question 1 for the regulators. Incoming question. Does the commission, and it could be for David or for Commissioner Presley or for Chairman Danner here, has the commission, is the commission has the authority for prohibiting disconnections to munis and to co-ops in your respective states?
So this is Dave Danner, and no, we do not have jurisdiction over municipal utilities or public utility districts. But we are also aware that that those utilities have also stepped up and voluntarily stopped the disconnections. The governor had a proclamation which he did not order, but he requested that disconnections and late fees be stopped, and it's my understanding that those are all being followed by the municipals and public utilities.
Thank you. President Presley, I think you are on mute.
Sorry about that. In Mississippi, we actually, our order does cover municipalities, co-ops, and any utility at all in the state. And so as our legislative declaration of policy in Mississippi vests our agency with statutory direction to make sure that we regulate public utilities regardless of their nature in a manner in which is consistent with maintaining public health and welfare. And so at the beginning of this crisis, our Mississippi Emergency Management Agency and Mississippi State Department of Health were both vested by the governor as being the coordinating agencies as related to obviously the virus, but also in making requests of state agencies. Our governor in his emergency declaration also suspended relevant state statutes that would enable flexibility and to carry out the mission of preventing further, obviously, dissemination of the virus. And we consulted with the Attorney General's office and believed and agreed with the AG that, in fact, the governor's executive order, which suspended certain state statutes, which was obviously being done to combat the virus, coupled with the legislative declaration of policy that invested the commission with the job of regulating public utilities, even though we normally would not regulate the rates of municipality or anything affecting rates, which would be the shutoffs of municipalities or cooperatives, water associations, rural water associations, who normally their rates would not come under our jurisdiction. We felt, and the Attorney General affirmed, that our jurisdiction would then obviously apply in this case. And so our order applies across the board. And fortunately, outside of a little confusion in the beginning, we reached out to the trade association for our electric cooperatives, our municipalities, our water associations, and asked them, get the message out to your members that this order does apply to them. Normally it would not, but in the circumstances it does apply. This has been vetted with the Attorney General's office and is under the governor's order, and we've not had any issue with that. Everybody has complied. There's been a little confusion in the beginning, but we're over 30 days in, and everybody's complied, and so we made it effective across the board, everybody in the state.
Okay. Thank you. This question is, another question came. This is for the system dispatcher, for Mr. Huck. With the load curve changing this drastically, how is system stability affected, if it is? Is preferential dispatch for renewable energy still being enforced?
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. So first thing on with respect to dispatch, so we dispatch based upon this concept called security constrained economic dispatch. And so really what we're looking to do with dispatch is dispatching that watt that is going to be most efficient and most economic for the consumers in our footprint. As far as fluctuations in stability. We have not seen any stability issues thus far. And I think because we've been able to better tailor what our day ahead forecasting is going to look like as this has progressed. We had this fortunately for our team that works in operations has basically ramped up. And so we, as soon as we started to see trending towards folks working from home, we started seeing trends of industrial and manufacturing customers no longer either closing plants or cutting down on shifts. We ourselves started to adjust our own math heading into the day to ensure that we were appropriately capturing, to the best of our ability, how much load that we actually thought that we were going to be providing power for that day. So far, no fluctuations in stability. I think our operations team has done a good job of trying to adjust the math on the fly.
Okay, thank you. Here's another question for the regulators. Regarding delay payments of regulatory fees, how long is it delayed? If you have temporary policies right now, for how long?
So this is Dave Danner. In Washington, we have not delayed the regulatory fees for the energy utilities. We have only done so for the much smaller transportation companies that we regulate, and we've delayed those for 60 days, in one case 90 days. We've extended them till September 1st. In part, that's because the IRS has delayed income tax filings until August 15th. And normally we've required the annual fees to be paid after the companies deal with their taxes. So in this case, it's September 1st. There is one case that we have moved one industry to a little bit later, and that's the airport limousine industry.
Thank you.
In Mississippi, we have actually we have one of our largest IOU utilities, Mississippi Power, which is voluntarily suspended their late fees. We're only one billing cycle actually in right now, and so we're looking to some of the companies have voluntarily done that. We have continued to try to stress to our consumers that these bills will be due at the end of this pandemic, and so at some point there was an idea that the electricity was going to be free, and we know obviously that will only further complicate recovery efforts and the general economic situation as it stands. So we've tried to be very clear that while you don't face a threat of disconnection, you will in fact have to pay the bill when we come out of this. And so some of the fees have been left on. Some of the late fees have. We're looking, as I mentioned in my opening comments, to try to find innovative ways to help consumers who maybe are struggling to pay that bill or have been during our 60-day shutoff period. Can we apply deposits and then have a gradual recouping of a deposit spread out over a year, even if a deposit is needed after that period? And so we're looking at all those ways. We did pass last week, I failed to mention this earlier, an accounting order that we have asked our utilities to set aside their COVID-19 costs so we can deal with that in recovery and look at any federal funds that may become available. So that's been a big part of it. You know, in the United States, one of the issues we've got right now related to to disconnections, late fees and the like, has been a move by some in Congress to actually strip state authority in this region. And so NARUC is pushing back very hard on that because we feel like that this area of jurisdiction belongs with the states because we are already doing what Congress is talking about doing. And so this issue is not going to go away. We're trying to stress that even though the fees may be on there, that utilities work with their consumers on a payment plan, most of which already have that level billing and the like, and that we come out of here, as Chairman Danner said a minute ago, we just haven't been here before. So some of these things we've got to be innovative with. And as NARUC president, I have committed to forming a task force that we'll look at response and how we take lessons learned from this, because I think we're all going to be in the international community. We're all going to be in this together as we learn best practices.
All right, thank you. This question is, we're going to alternate, go back to the system operator. You know, the PJM and the regulators have been talking about resilience planning and taking into account resilience in your planning procedures. How will resilience planning need to change to take pandemics into account? And does there need to be new standards and actions taken as a result? What specific measures, if any, do you think make sense to prepare in advance for future possible black swan events or pandemics like this?
That's a really good question. And I think that as we emerge from this, our mindset will start gravitating towards the lessons learned component of this, as opposed to let's just get through it. So I think in, hopefully a couple of months, I'll have a much more robust answer to this. But I do think that we have had situations where, for instance, a large generating facility needed to be refueled. And the challenge of getting, a couple hundred workers, potentially from out of state, to that generating unit in order to get it refueled, when a state, a county, etc., has said, we don't want this collection or this amount of people aggregating, and we certainly don't want them coming in from out of state. So the concept of the generation of a watt and getting it from point A to point B, it's a heck of a puzzle. And I think as we start thinking about emerging from the virus and lessons learned, part of that puzzle will be how much actual sort of human combination of aggregation as well as necessity for operation was necessary for all assets on the system. And is there some thinking surrounding ensuring that the system itself, both generation assets and transmission assets, can function and remain resilient, even sans those potential human capital assets that are there trying to either run or maintain those units. So I undoubtedly think that's a conversation where we will have, and some lessons that we can learn, because we have seen this issue in real time.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to like we're learning as we experience this thing all together. That's such an event that no one has witnessed before. This is a question for regulators again. Are states considering using additional federal funds like HEAP appropriated in the CARES Act to address uncollectibles that will likely increase as more customers face difficulties in paying their utility bills in the future?
So, well, yes, the answer is yes. We know that there was more LIHEAP funding made available in the CARES Act, and we're looking forward to seeing what's in the next stimulus packages from Congress. The LIHEAP funding is administered through our Department of Commerce, and so I don't have the particulars on it. I think that the answer, though, is yes. We are looking at all the federal funding we can get, because at this point, every dollar matters in getting assistance out to people.
Okay.
I would say the same thing from Mississippi. I mean, we're looking for every funding avenue that's out there to help mitigate against these costs. We have been very, just as Dave, Commissioner Danner just mentioned, we've been very cognizant of all the dollars that are coming out in the stimulus package. And actually, I think that you will see NARUC as we go forward looking at ways in which in our national advocacy on the Hill and within the Congress, try to push some of these issues. We know that it's going to be key as we go forward, and how you thread that needle. I don't think anyone knows right now. There's been talk about direct assistance to consumers, obviously to help pay for these bills with the second wave of the stimulus, but also is it more appropriate for there to be direct aid related to uncollectible costs? And so I think we're going to keep a keen eye on that and follow that and make sure that we're advocating as a national organization for what best is a consensus of our members that will help protect the public interest throughout the country and in their states.
Okay, thank you. Here's a question again and this could be for anyone actually. How have you been dealing with the continuing health and welfare needs of your staff who are adjusting to working from home, particularly those with children who must balance work and home demands?
I can start. Flexibility. I think that we don't know what unique circumstances each of our employees is experiencing at home. It could be small children. It could be helping your older children do online learning. It could be someone in the house who's actually contracted the virus and is sick. It could be an elderly parent. We have no idea what's happening in people's homes. We encourage our employees to tell us what's happening in their homes so that we can create some flexibility around the work. And to be perfectly honest, and the reason why I went through the PJM consists of, frankly, planning, markets, and operations, it's really the operations folks that we are really, really centered on ensuring can continue to do their jobs. Everybody else, the message I convey is, look, if you've got a day or 2 or 5 or 20 where you can't conduct business as usual, buttoned up from 8 to 5 or whatever the business hours are, we're going to figure out a way to make it work with you individually. That's, for me, the only way to do this and show the right amount of care for what we're going through collectively right now.
I just say that I couldn't be prouder of my team. We've always had a very family-friendly agency. We've allowed babies in the workplace and liberal telecommute policies and so forth. But what I'm seeing is people are working effectively from their homes. We have to be, tolerant, because I've been on Zoom calls where a child has interrupted asking for a peanut butter sandwich. We hear toilets flushing in the background. That's just life. And, you just smile and move on. But seriously, no one has dropped the ball. No one has missed a deliverable. And I believe that even when this virus passes and we go back to what might be considered normal, I think that we're going to be seeing a lot more telework because we've kind of proved the concept during this period.
Mm-hmm.
We have had, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I can add, do you hear me now?
Yes, we hear you fine.
Okay, thank you. So I can just mention once again that in our office, the employees that have a child below 10 are free from work, but from the work in the office. So all of us, we work from the home. We manage during this time to reply on all requests on time. Although in this period when the state of emergency is declared, some of the deadlines do not apply according to the law. However, we managed to provide everything on time. Additionally, there are some, let's say, time-consuming subjects that we work on it, where a group of more employees should revise the documents. Thank you.
Yeah, we have had a very good run at the commission in the sense of we are down to one staff member who is actually in our state office building to receive if someone comes in with a paper file. We tried to ask everyone to do that electronically, but we are keeping that office staff with one person, and the rest of us have been working from home. I think that the big thing I'm worried about are families getting enough of seeing each other already, and so I think there's overload on family contact. And so we're trying to do as many Zoom calls as we can now to help distract from that. But I'm fortunate to have been able to meet the children of a lot of our employees over Zoom over the last couple of weeks. And so, I'm like Chairman Danner and Awesome. I think that it's gone very well. I think that, we're going to return to a new normal in which we're going to realize there's a lot of things we've been doing and a lot of meetings we've been holding in person that could be done via this format and otherwise, although there's still obviously very real value in in-person meetings. We have tried to keep the morale of our people up to try to, and I'll just be candid with you. I think we've spent a long time in shell shock, and just really going through how do we get our arms around this? How does an agency change? And to keep our eye on being proactive and reactive to the things that are immediate. But, we're continuing to keep our focus also on the things that are important. And we have been able to do that by keeping our folks pulled together, and we're elected by the public in Mississippi. So each commissioner has their own office in their region of the state, and I represent the northern region of the state. And we every day field consumer calls on everything you can imagine in the utility industry, and a lot of things we don't deal with. And so we have been rotating out how those phones are answered. Last year I think we clicked in at 28,000 consumer contacts to my office alone. So we're continuing to manage that, and we're trying to be innovative and keep our folks' spirits up. And make sure that our workforce in the utility industry, last Sunday was National Utility Lineman Work Day, Appreciation Day, and to make sure that not only the PSC employees morale is kept up, but also to our frontline utility workers who are out in the weather, in the aftermath of tornadoes, and also in their response as we go forward. One thing I would note about personal interaction, we have worked with our gas companies and any utility that requires going into the home to suspend those type of work orders unless the company makes sure that they feel like the scenario is safe. So if new construction, there's not been an occupied dwelling, they're going into those homes to connect gas. But we're trying to think across the spectrum to not only keep morale and mental health good among our employees and the workers, but also how we can prevent unforced errors as we go forward.
Thank you, President Presley. I'm going to jump in. This is Erin Hisham. We just have time for probably a couple more questions. So I'm going to jump in and take one, which can go to anyone. How can the public remain engaged in the regulatory process and intervene in the decision-making process while public meetings are suspended? How can we maintain transparency in such an environment? Open that to anyone to jump in.
All right, so this is Dave Danner, and I would just say we are not suspending any of our public processes. We are moving to remote meetings, but citizens can call in, citizens can email questions, because citizens can listen in. And we do a lot of outreach with our stakeholders and with the public so that they know how to participate. And in fact, we have seen very good participation. We've had open meetings with 100 members of the public attending. So we're pretty sure that the outreach is working. We sometimes have, with our rate cases, we have gone out and done public hearings in the service territories of the utilities. And we may not be doing those. We may again be doing those telephonically or remotely in the future. But so far, we're not seeing a decline in the public participation in our processes, and that's very heartening.
Yeah, so we were doing our meetings via teleconference. Obviously, we actually have a YouTube channel. I think we've got not many people watch it, but we put our meetings out on YouTube so people can hear the audio. And in some cases, we've actually when we did in-person meetings before the shelter-in-place order, we broadcast those. We had in our regular meeting 2 weeks ago now, last week, we're like Dave, we had well over 100 people call in. I think that's more than would have participated in public. And so we had a good attendance to that meeting. Also, I'm looking at, as I mentioned, we're elected, and so communications with constituents is very key. And so we're contemplating over the next week of holding a tele-town hall meeting where citizens in my district, the 33 counties that I represent, can actually call in and we can take some email questions and try to keep our folks updated. I do about 50 town hall meetings a year throughout my district, and so I'm sort of feel constrained not being able to do that right now. We're going to try to do it from electronic means. We're also making sure that we are very studious in making sure that all filings are timely put on the website so that there's not any delay. Sometimes in normal course of business, we may have things coming in which we're not able to get out there on the website immediately. We're trying to be very studious about that to just continue making sure that what we're doing is transparent. Social media has been something in which we have used a ton to communicate. The commissioners individually have, and the commission has to get the word out, to get messages out. We've had big response on that. And so, we're using every tool and every means available, and we're still under our state Open Meetings Act. So we don't have the luxury of the commissioners talking to one another about votes that we're going to make or anything. We're still restricted based upon that. And so we're handling it fairly well, but we made transparency very key because we know that this is a little bit different world, and we want to go one step above what normally we would be doing.
Elena, would you like to add to this? You have like publics participate in North Macedonia, right? In hearings.
Yes, of course, on the different acts and the decisions of the regulatory authorities, the public is involved through the, of course, they can provide opinions through the website, or they can, if they are invited, they can participate on the preparatory sessions of the regulatory authorities. However, as I mentioned, in this period, we canceled all the meetings. However, we timely inform the public on our measures and our decisions through the web page of the regulatory authorities, through emails, and also through press releases. So the public is informed of what we are doing. We are, for example, during the day, we answer on the numerous emails of some of the interested parties.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to do one more question. I'm going to combine two questions together. First, the first part of the question is some regulators have some governments, not regulators, abroad, have said, okay, we're going to give bill relief for 3 months. Consumers who earn under 200 consumers who consume 200 kilowatt hours or less, for example, 200 cubic meters or less, will not have to pay for 2 months or for 3 months. And then the second part of the question is, let's say something like this does happen, and I don't know if some of your states are doing this or not. How would you open for each utility in the future a docket for recovery of COVID-19 expenses of some sort, like a rider in a rate case or something?
We're actually doing that now, Hashim. I mean, last week we put in as part of our order affirming our shutoff policy for another 30 days. Just exactly that. We're going to look at dollar for dollar recovery. Aside from any expenses that are defrayed by any federal funds that may come down. We think that's important for a couple of reasons. Number one, to get a true accounting of what these costs are and the effect of our orders going forward, so we understand and have a good picture as we go forward as to kind of what we're looking at financially. But I think it also is very important in the signals that we send from an economic regulator standpoint that we are going to look at these costs, that we're not asking the companies to write these off wholesale, but to pursue any funding that they can get. But at the end of the day, losses are losses, and they have to be accounted for. And aside from federal funding or some other source, we're going to have to deal with that. And so one of the things that as I said, we have continued to push with our customers is those bills are going to be due. Try to work out a payment plan. Try to access LIHEAP dollars. And we're going to be working over the next couple of weeks related to how we help connect up citizens with those federal dollars. But I think it's very prudent. I think it's the right thing to do to have an accurate measurement of these costs, to set that aside in an accounting order and address it at an appropriate time. You know, we have asked the utilities to step up, and they have, and they've done that under order. They would have probably done it voluntarily, but we passed an order. And the fair thing to protect the public interest is to account for that, figure out a way in which that's recovered, so that we don't further dig any economic holes that are already out there that's going to come forward. We've got to do this in a way that's both compassionate but also measured.
Correct.
So I'll just jump in. That I don't see that there's any chance that we would simply waive utility bills for any period of time. But we are looking to assist low-income and vulnerable people as best we can. We are also not looking to delay any proceedings, although some of the utilities themselves have stepped up and said we're going to slow it down or ask for an extension so that they don't have to do rate increases right now. And I do want to shout out to the utilities. I think the utilities have been very concerned about the welfare of their customers, and I think that's been good to see. We have had some petitions for accounting petitions from some of the utilities. They're currently pending before us, and so I don't want to comment on them right now because I can't say exactly how the three commissioners will deal with them.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe I can
please.
jump in just
Please.
for a second. For now, there are no discussions that the government, let's say through some funds, will cover the electricity bills or bills for energy for some category of the consumers. However, the government expanded or enlarged the group of the eligible consumers that can be provided by the social allowances for these vulnerable consumers. And also there are discussions not to calculate the interest on the unpaid invoices for this category of the consumers, and to allow payment of the unpaid debt on the several installments. These are for now the measures that are on the table for discussions.
Thank you. And with that, unfortunately, we have so many questions still that have been posed, and I am happy to report that we still have over 300 folks that are still with us, although we're half an hour late. So thank you all for joining us. We appreciate your participation. We also want to especially thank our expert volunteers for taking the time out of their busy schedules and during this very stressful time to keep us all updated on their organization's responses to the COVID pandemic. Just as a reminder, we will have the slide deck and the video recording in the next day or two, and we'll send a link. My best wishes for safety and wellness for all, and we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.